is the inspector running the honeybee protection program for the county, and he's going to go over county regulations, B&Ps, all the unincorporated parts of beekeeping. And with that, Jaime.
All right, thank you, Leah. Well, thank you all for showing up today. The majority of you are beekeepers, and for coming to a beekeeping laws and regs class. It's not the most fun topic for you guys, so I can tell that you guys are responsible beekeepers. Can everybody hear me okay back there? I don't really want that Madonna mic stuff, so I'm just going to try to talk. If you can't hear me or if I start drifting, just let me know. I'll do my best to try to project my voice. So my name's Jaime Garza. I'm an apiary inspector with the County of San Diego's Agriculture Department. You might hear a couple different phrases of our Agriculture Department. It's Agriculture Weights and Measures, Ag Commissioner's Office. They're all synonymous, okay? I will try to stay consistent with Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures, but in some of that Food and Ag Code, you might see Ag Commissioner's Office, and it's us, the Agriculture Department. A little bit of brief background about myself. I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, got a Bachelor of Science there. I've worked for an Agriculture Department in Madera County. That's actually how I started inspecting bees. All those truck shipments that you were seeing coming across the border, I was on the receiving end, inspecting those bees coming off trucks, 400 hives at a time. I can't tell you how happy they'd be to get off those trucks and get offloaded. They would get offloaded like at 6 in the morning when the sun's still not up, and but the bees were excited to get off, and they let you know that. I also did colony cluster strength inspection. So once the bees were in the almonds, I would do an assessment to see the strength of the colony, how many frames of bees were in the hives, and and life happens. I go away from that job, come back around. I'm working for the Ag Department for a number of years, and the honeybee protection program starts up, and I'm back to inspecting bees. So here I am. And today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what I do, the beekeeping ordinance, and we'll just jump to the next slide here. So here's just an overview. Again, I'm going to talk about the benefits that honeybees have to agriculture and the environment. A lot of you, this is you guys are already familiar with this. Purpose of our beekeeping ordinance, keeping bees legally in the unincorporated parts of the county. What I do, and also how I respond to managed bee complaints, what is done with feral bee complaints, and just some frequently asked questions that we have, that we get. All right, so benefits. Everybody knows crop pollinations. One of the primary benefits of raising honeybees, as you got those numbers from Tracy, and actually for commercial beekeepers, it's been about 10, 15 years now, but the major income source for beekeepers these days is pollination services. It's no longer honey production. And part of that has to do with loss of habitat and just the challenges with just nectar in the different environments. So pollination services is a major income source for beekeepers, especially almonds. But here in San Diego County, there's also avocados, citrus, berries that are pollinated, and you can see the values. They are high value crops. Just to give you an idea of almonds, their value in California is $5.6 billion. So it's a big industry. It's very important. And the role that you guys have in all of that, not only do the honeybees that you're raising help to, your local backyard gardens, urban gardens, natural landscapes, residential landscapes, but it's important that the health of your hives are maintained, because honeybees go to the same flowers, whether they're a commercial, hobbyist, backyard beekeepers, and the diseases can be transmitted from one colony to the next. And that's really one of the primary reasons that all beekeepers are required to register, because honeybees, they don't separate from commercial to hobbyists, and they all commingle together, and they all spread diseases together. So another important product, is honey, wax products. And I already discussed the natural and landscape pollination. We will move on to the next slide. All right, so by a show of hands, how How many people think honeybees are endangered? Okay. Threatened? Okay. Well, we're going to show this video here. It's just a couple minutes that just kind of tackles a couple of the misconceptions about honeybees.
You've probably heard a few of these things about bees. They're in danger, they're being poisoned by pesticides, they're spontaneously vanishing, they're going extinct. The plight of bees has been in the news for years now. Back in 2013, Time magazine asked us all to imagine, quote, a world without bees. In short, whatever you've heard about bees in the past decade, it's really bad. So what is going on with bees? The truth is, they are in trouble, but maybe not the bees you're thinking of. Without bees, humans would have a serious food problem. Some 35% of crops around the world benefit from pollinators like bees. Without pollinators, everything from strawberries to chocolate to coffee would suffer. And of course, there's the honey. And there's one particular species, the western honeybee, that farmers rely on all around the world. It's also probably what you'd just call a bee.
Yeah, generally when people think about bees, it is the western honeybee.
This is Bernardo Nino. He's a researcher at UC Davis and head of R&D at a startup called UBees. Bernardo's quick to point out all the crops in America that benefit from honeybees.
Cherries, blueberries, apples, some avocados.
And some that we couldn't grow at all without honeybees.
Here in California, the almonds are a very important crop, and they essentially require honeybee pollination.
This all explains why it was big news when, starting in late 2006, beekeepers reported losing 30 to 90% of their colonies. For comparison, it's normal to lose more like 15 to 20% of colonies annually. The weirdest part is that the bees weren't all dying, they were just flying away. It was bad enough to warrant an official term.
Colony collapse disorder can be described as essentially all the adult bees, or most of the adult bees, leaving the colony, leaving the queen, healthy-looking brood, and that was part of the really stressful and confusing part of that the bees seem to just leave.
Colony collapse disorder, or CCD, broke into the national news.
Colony collapse disorder.
Colony collapse.
Colony collapse disorder.
Colony collapse disorder remains a mystery.
And for years now, we've all fretted about the beepocalypse.
Do you like to eat? Well, this next story is of concern to you.
In the years since 2006, we've learned a lot about CCD, but it's still a bit of a mystery.
There was a lot of funding thrown at research programs. There was never any particular one thing that was defined as the cause of CCD.
Instead, we've come to better understand the stresses that bees face. For example, entire colonies can fall victim to the varroa mite, a stubborn parasite that's wreaked havoc on bees for decades. Certain pesticide chemicals called neonicotinoids can also be deadly. And viruses, poor nutrition, and habitat loss can take their toll as well. This mix of factors might be causing colony collapse disorder, but any one of them is a problem that needs addressing regardless of CCD. So, since 2006, beekeepers have upped their game to improve colony health, and it seems to be working. Numbers vary, but for the past couple of years, the number of bee colonies lost in the US has been leveling off.
The silver line.
All right. Okay, so short and simple answer, honeybees are not endangered, they are not threatened. Honeybees are raised and should be looked more like you're raising chickens or you're raising pigs, like livestock. It's beekeeping's a form of animal husbandry. Don't get me wrong, there are stressors. Here's some statistics from USDA from the last 20 years. Basically, the number of colonies has stabilized within the last 20 years. They run anywhere from 2.5 to 2.7 million colonies in the US. Worldwide, if you look at statistics, the colonies have stabilized, and actually in some developing countries, the number of colonies being produced and grown is actually growing. So there's right, so there's just some numbers from the last 20 years, but don't get me wrong, honeybees do need help. They don't need saving, but they do need help. You guys are helping them by raising bees. Others, gardeners, can help by planting supportive plants to help assist honeybees. And again, for the benefits that they give with the pollination, the honey production, and the help to improve natural habitat, they are a positive, beneficial insect. And but some of the primary stressors that are more common and I refer to as like the 3 Ps, pests and parasites, poor nutrition, and pesticides. So pest parasite primarily being the varroa mite and the viruses that it introduces. Poor nutrition is just habitat loss. There's just not as much rainfall on the western half of the United States, and there's just not as many flowers for the bees to feed on. We will go to the next slide. All right, so talking about colonies, we're gonna differentiate between the 2 types of, colonies. There's feral honeybees and managed honeybees. All the numbers that you saw in the news media and the hype, that was all related to managed honeybees. So beekeepers raising bees and the losses. There's not that much research that's been done going out there and collecting data on how much established feral hives there are. A feral hive would be a beehive, a bee colony that's found out in the wild. Unfortunately, sometimes they'll find their way into like water meter boxes, sometimes in exposed tree trunks, or roofs of people's homes. You'll find these wild established beehives, feral honey beehives, and a lot of these, as well as sheds, compost bins. You name it, sometimes they'll find it, especially it seems like in Southern California. Now, Tracy had hit on as far as like Africanized honeybees and where they establish. A lot of times they're looking for smaller cavities, and they're not as picky as European honeybees. European honeybees wouldn't make a colony like this being exposed like that. They want to have protection. They want to be covered, and they usually need a bigger cavity. They wouldn't necessarily make their home in a water meter box because there's a lot of moisture in there, and the cavity's pretty small. We'll go to All right, so now we're going to talk about managed honeybees. This is a video, but I'll just explain it to you. So managed honeybees, typically there's the most common hive body that's used is the Langstroth. It has anywhere from 8 to 10 wood frames inside that the bees will make their combs in. But there also are top bar hives, which are long rectangular ones, and there are pictures that I will show to you. But basically here, there's 3 individual hive bodies. In the fall, winter, the colony reduces the population, so you might only see 1 or 2 stories high of boxes. In the spring, summer, as there's more food that the bees need to store, beekeepers start adding supers, and that's sometimes when you'll see 3 or 4 boxes tall. If you see a beekeeper raising bees like in the Dakotas or Montana, sometimes you can see 7, 8 story high beehives, which is a good thing because the majority of that is all honey that's being stored and collected and stored by the bees. All right, we'll just go to the next one. We don't need to, no.
Managed European bee colony.
We'll
We
skip.
call it a single story.
All right, so that's really the difference between feral bees, managed bees. Managed bees, beekeepers introducing the bees into a box and taking ownership of those bees. What I have seen from time to time is a beekeeper introducing bees into a box and then kind of walking away for 4 or 5 months, and then come honey harvest time, going back into to see what's going on, and those bees are a little unruly. And so, we want to make sure that and that is my role, is helping beekeepers be successful and they're tending to their bees. All right, so jurisdictions, there's unincorporated and incorporated. There's incorporated are the 18 cities within the county. They're all listed here. I have jurisdiction over the unincorporated, or more of the eastern part. It gets a little tricky with some of the cities because some of the cities have both incorporated and unincorporated. For example, there's La Mesa and Vista. Rancho Santa Fe is actually has a lot of unincorporated. Encinitas has a couple pockets of unincorporated. So we do have on our website, on our Bee program website, we do have what's called a jurisdiction finder, where it's just a nice convenient tool. All you do is you type in the address of the location where your bees are, it drops a pin and it lets you know what jurisdiction you're in. All right. The University of California Cooperative Extension did a nice job in kind of creating a one-stop shop on their website of finding those municipal codes, because sometimes once you know what jurisdiction you're in, say you're in one of the cities, it is really hard to try to dig through the municipal code to find out what's applicable as far as bees go. So if you go to their website, under their laws and policies, they have a list of all the different cities, and at a click of a button, it'll take you to the right links to find those municipal codes. All right. So if you're in the city and you're keeping bees, you will want to, as a responsible beekeeper, you will want to make sure that you're following the city ordinance requirements in addition to the county ordinance requirements. So if you're a city beekeeper, you have bees in the city, one of the 18 cities, the only requirement from the county is that you register your bees. Registration, it's a pretty simple form to fill out. The top third part of it is just talking about your mailing, like your mailing contact address. The middle part of it is, do you want to be notified of any pesticide applications within a mile of your apiary? When a commercial applicator is spraying a pesticide within a mile, that, on the label it says that it's toxic to bees, it can harm your bees. Do you want to be notified prior to them spraying? You could request to have that. And for a hobbyist beekeeper or a backyard beekeeper, 9 or fewer hives, there is no fee. It's just a matter of filling out the paperwork. So, yes?
For county registrants, do you issue a registration number to stamp on the hive? Or do you go over 10?
No, we don't issue any registration number. On the commercial side, they do issue brand numbers, but no, there's no registration number issued once you register. You will usually, I do send a correspondent email to all registered beekeepers after we've gone through the information, your registration, and just let you know that, hey, thank you for registering for this year. So, yes.
Is this applicable just to San Diego?
APR registrations are, from the very top, it's a California state law. So all beekeepers, whether you're a hobbyist or a commercial or sideliner beekeeper, you are required to register with the ag department of your county that your bees are in. Yes.
Is it also true that if you have less than 9 or less hives, there is no registration fee?
Yes, there is no registration fee. However, depending on which city you are in, they may have some sort of permit fee or some sort of registration fee, depending on that city municipal code.
I was thinking specifically county, like the County of Orange.
Right. So most counties do not charge for registering less than 10 hives. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
If you change the number that you have, do you need to notify the county?
Well, did everybody hear that question? If you change the number of colonies that you registered, do you need to change with the county? What I always suggest, because there's kind of an ebb and flow, you might do some splits in the spring, it might increase your colonies. I always let beekeepers know at the max peak time, summertime, when you establish all your bee colonies, how many colonies are you going to have? Whatever that number is, put it on your registration. So. And so that way it's going to cover you, especially with our ordinance requirements. We have a tiered system that I'll talk about, but that can impact your distance from roads and structures and that sort of thing. And so you just want to make sure that you don't start off at 2 and you can be 25 feet from a property line, and then all of a sudden you're up to 6 or 7, and then you're supposed to be further away because it's challenging to relocate hives once they're established in a spot. All right, so you can find our APR registration on our website, our Honeybee Protection Program website. I really encourage you guys to check out the website. There's not just paperwork regulation stuff, but there's really helpful stuff for your hives. Part of our goal is not only to make sure you're compliant, but also that you're raising healthy honeybee hives, because honeybees are so important, and not only hobbyist hives, but that also can impact our apiary industry on the commercial side. So I inspect both hobbyist as well as commercial, and I'm looking for different things between the two. So, all right, so what is our, talking about our county bee ordinance, it provides opportunity, now that it's been revised, it provides opportunities to keep bees in smaller parcels of lands, strictly said. It's a tiered system. The setbacks from roads and property lines all have been reduced. We've implemented some best management practices, so that way beekeepers can keep their bees without disturbing their neighbors, as well as for those who have a sensitivity or perhaps a physical limitation, if there were a swarming or a overdefensive hive in a neighboring property, they might want to consider having a greater safety buffer. We do have this option to opt in as a sensitive site for residents in the unincorporated parts of the county.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Because Oceanside is listed in your jurisdiction. However, Oceanside decided to have its own ordinance. Who should we be listening to?
Our jurisdiction is only, as far as our best management practices and our Bee Ordinance, is only applied to the unincorporated parts of the county as far as best management practices go. The only thing that overlaps into the cities is apiary registration. So you would follow City of Oceanside's whatever distance, setbacks, water requirements, or whatever beekeeping requirements. The only thing that you would need to meet for the county is registration. All right, so we do have aside from our apiary registration, we do have a best management practice checklist. This is what I'm basically looking for. And all these requirements, they were worked out with help from the San Diego Beekeeping Society, commercial beekeepers, stakeholders. So it's not stuff that we're just we're not dictating to you, hey, this is what you got to do. This is stuff that, that beekeepers were already practicing. It's just a responsible, good beekeeping animal husbandry technique. So registration, the online course, we do have an online course that the Cooperative Extension put together that just reviews for a beginning beekeeper these best practices, hive location, flyover barrier, water supply, requeening, approved hives, fire prevention, and we're going to go through all these one by one. All right, so I already discussed registration, so it's good only for a year. So it expires December 31st of every year. So as a beekeeper, you should be, like for us, our county, we sent out our registrations in the middle of December. We're getting a ton of them back. And basically all you're doing is you're just updating your information. Number of colonies, perhaps a contact information, perhaps you changed your phone numbers, perhaps you've added new locations, perhaps you've taken some off. So again, it's free for 9 or fewer hives, and but it applies all across the board, statewide. Okay. All right, so here's our checklist. Basically, this is just, you have copies of your checklist in your pamphlet, along with the beekeeping ordinance of San Diego County. Now, the ordinance is 4 pages. This is basically the ordinance reduced into 1 page. So it's just kind of a checkoff list. It helps you as a beekeeper to go through all the requirements, and you should be following all these requirements, and as you are implementing these things into your apiary, you should be in compliance, and hopefully it should be mitigating any situations that you would have, or your bees from basically becoming a nuisance. All right. For first-time registered beekeepers who are having bees placed, who have bees in the unincorporated parts of the county, we do ask, it is a requirement that they take this online course. It's a free beekeeping online course. Anybody can access it, but it is a requirement for beekeepers who are registering for the first time in the unincorporated parts of the county. It's about a 20-minute video with 10 questions at the end of it. All right, so like I said, there's a 3-tiered system, tiers A, B, C. This is after all that feedback and that research that Tracy did and going out with stakeholders, this is what was agreed upon, and this is what made sense to everybody. So it's a 3-tiered system. Tier A, 1 to 2 colonies. Again, a colony is just a vertical stack of boxes. There's only 1 queen. made up with adult workers, drones, and all the different life stages, eggs, larvae, pupae. Tier B's 3 to 20 colonies. There's an example of some top bar hives, the rectangular ones. And then Tier C's 21 or more colonies. And depending on the number of colonies, the setback distance requirements from like roads and property lines increases. And that's just logical because the more bee colonies you're keeping, there's more bees in the area, which you do want to have that buffer between you and the activities that go on on your neighbor's property, right? Okay. So this is just kind of broken down the way each of the tiers works as far as the distance requirements. We'll go on to the next one. It's a little bit more visually appealing. So here you have a picture of, your picture of your hive. You know, you want to be 25 feet from a road, 25 feet from property lines, 35 feet from neighbors' dwellings, and then 150 feet from sensitive sites. I'll talk about sensitive sites in a minute here. Next one, Tier B, the distance requirements get increased to 50 feet. So it's 50 feet from roads, property lines, 100 feet from houses, and now here's where it kind of gets tricky. So if you have up to 10 hives, you still just need to be 150 feet from a sensitive site. If you have 11 to 20 hives, then you'll want to be 300 feet. And so I'm going to try to stay consistent with colonies and hives, but basically they're synonymous, okay? Hives refers more to the housing structure, colonies to actually bees and the makeup of the bees, but they're pretty synonymous. All right, Tier C, 21 or more hives. So 100 feet from property, 100 feet from roads, 300 feet from neighbors' dwellings, 450 feet from sensitive sites. All right, now you might be asking, what is a sensitive site? All right, sensitive sites. So these are just automatically adopted sites that for the different activities that go on there, it is a requirement to have a greater safety buffer. Hospitals, horse boarding facilities, playgrounds, daycares, senior care facilities. Now these are all locations where if honeybees were too close, they could be a hazard to the activities that are going on in those locations. So we do have that increased buffer to protect the folks on those activities. Excellent. All right. Now, as I talked about, there is an option for opt-in sensitive sites. Now, if somebody has a hypersensitivity to bee stings and they see a neighbor putting up a beehive, that's probably going to concern them. And so they do have the option. Now, this only applies to unincorporated parts of the county. So residents, constituents in the unincorporated parts of the county, they can opt in to be considered a sensitive site on their property for that medical reason. Now, they do have to fill out an application form. We do ask for like a doctor's note that verifies that they actually do have a sensitivity to bee stings. But also, if there is some sort of physical limitation, if the person is handicapped or in a wheelchair, we do make exceptions for that as well, because if in the event they needed to get away from some bees chasing them, it's going to be more difficult to do so and could cause a hazard to that person. Now, there have been some beekeepers that have been affected by these opt-in sensitive sites. However, of the beekeepers that I have worked with them, what we ended up doing was just looking at the property, looking at a different spot on their property, and they were able to relocate their hives to where they could be compliant. So we're not out there to discourage beekeeping. We want to encourage beekeeping as much as we can, while again protecting the public as well. So, all right. One of the best management practices is flyover barrier. I get a lot of questions about this. Well, what is a flyover barrier? How do I meet this requirement? So the requirement is, if you're placing bees within 300 feet of a neighboring dwelling, you are required to have this flyover barrier. So it's a it's a 6-foot barrier that causes the flight path of the bees to go upwards. So that way, when they're going to be flying off the property, they're going to be at a height that they're not going to intersect with people or animals on a neighboring property. It's just a good practice. A lot of ordinances have it. It's nationwide. The benefit to the beekeeper not only is that flight path, but it helps to conceal the hives too. So sometimes it's a good thing in that respect. It could be a combination. It could be you can get as fancy as like wooden fence, but it also could be vegetation. If you like to garden, if you want to have some shrubs, the shrubs are dense. Just make sure they're dense enough that it's going to cause the bees to fly upwards. So you might already have that natural vegetation on certain sides. So when you are placing your hives, that's something you do want to consider, especially if you're in more of a residential area. Water supply. This is very important. I can't tell you how many. We got a lot of complaints this year, and it all related back to water. And it related to what it ended up happening is there was no water established for the bees initially. The bees found a neighboring water source, whether it was an animal trough, whether it was a pool or dog bowls, and dogs are lapping up bees and getting stung and that sort of thing. And so it's easily can be avoided if there's a water source on the property where we're placing the bees, and if not, providing the bees a water source. But not just one water source, because maybe it goes stagnant, maybe it dries out. Think about providing multiple water sources, or if you do have access to, if they're in like a backyard setting, perhaps a self-filling water station. It is important to have landing sites for the bees. You don't want your bees to start drowning, because dead bees are going to really dirty up that water, and it's really going to be an undesirable water source for the bees, and then you're going to be back to perhaps having another problem. So here's examples of water sources. Water hyacinths, good. A lot of surface area is always good for the bees. They prefer that rather than a deep trough. You just want to make sure that your water source doesn't go stagnant, because then from there, rather than not just only raising bees, you're going to be raising mosquitoes. So.
Have you seen any interaction with Bacillus thuringiensis to keep the wigglers out of the ponds, and bees using that water?
I've heard both. Like, some beekeepers will throw like the little donuts in to help keep them out. In residential settings, I've also seen that beekeepers will actually run a air pump into it just to circulate it every so often. So those are a couple things that have been done. If I have seen any of the Bacillus thuringiensis placed in water containers for like killing mosquito.
What about temporary use of peroxide, over-the-counter peroxide for a few days?
Well,
no,
yeah, I don't know if I'd. Yeah.
I'm saying enclosed, because peroxide degenerates to water. So.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anybody using peroxide or anything, but usually it's just checking your water source, making sure it's full, changing out the water every so often if you don't have air pump, or if it's not self-filling and that sort of thing. So.
I use corks.
Corks as landings? Yeah, yeah, and that's just an example right there. Another example so in this example here, it's just a barrel, and they just slowly open the knob, so it's just a little trickle, and so so it's already full, and it just continues to refill it at a slow pace. The bees kind of like the slow trickle, and they'll be all over it. So just different ideas. They love these tiered water fountains. A lot of time, I've been to a couple complaints where they've found the tiered water fountain. So if you're in a residential area, you have a fountain that makes for a good water source.
What about the dirtier the water, the better concept?
I heard too, yeah.
So.
Because bees like dirty water.
They do.
It's not necessarily dirty water, but there's minerals in the water that they're looking for. Now, sometimes to establish a water source, what I have suggested to beekeepers, sometimes if they're not using the water source, maybe throwing a little, breaking off a salt lick, putting it in there. They suspect, same with the pools. There's some research that suspects that the reason they're liking the pools is the salt in it. So maybe they're looking for minerals.
I sent you that article, that research article, so I don't know if that's something you want to...
Yeah, okay, well, whatever works best for you. It's just, there's a lot of different ways, to do it. So we'll move on to the next one. All right, yeah. So sources of the bees. So establishing bees. So some beekeepers will source feral bees for different reasons, and others will source from breeder stock. Now, there are risks to both, I guess you could say, but there's less risk on sourcing them from a breeder stock, because you know what you're getting. With a feral bee, it's kind of roll of the dice, because we do have Africanized honeybees, and we don't know if, swarms typically aren't going to show their true traits until they're established, until they have a home. And then, you may or may not be surprised. So we'll move on to the next one. All right. So this is just a map of our where Africanized honeybees have colonized. We're colonized in Southern California. There's about 4 or 5 different counties. So that's why when you're collecting a swarm out there, especially from kind of, lower places, perhaps L boxes, perhaps or established hives from the L box, from the water meter box, or the swarm that's just on your neighbor's tree. Typically Africanized honeybees tend to have cast off smaller swarms, but that's not always true. It's just once they're established, they're going to let you know. It's not like they have their Visa card that's telling you that they're Africanized. So you just kind of wait and see. So our practice is, what do we say about that? We don't recommend you capturing a feral swarm and starting from that, especially if it's your first year. I mean, worst case is like they establish, you're a beginning beekeeper, and you go to do one of your first hive inspections, and they're just in your face. I mean, it's a hazard not only to you, to your household, but to your neighbors as well. And I'll show you a video in a few slides here where it can get kind of scary. So so we suggest that you replace the queen of that feral swarm after it's been established. Like maybe after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, it looks like they're going to stay in the hive. You should already start having plans, even as soon as you're thinking of capturing feral swarms, to source those queens. I know sometimes, depending on what time of year it is, it can be a little bit challenging. But if you're going to do that practice of capturing a feral swarm, you should do the practice of replacing those queens. All right, so desirable honeybee traits. You want to make sure that their temperament's gentle and calm. I would like to see more beekeepers not use gloves. If you're not using gloves, that means your bees are gentle. I mean, if you're strapping up, having to, put on all this armor, like you're going into battle. I mean, do you want to battle your bees, or do you want to just, be able to handle them, no problem? If you're able to handle them gentle, not a problem. They shouldn't. They're not going to be a nuisance to your neighbors. And it is possible. I've been to a couple different sites. I've been to sites where beekeepers didn't, where all they had was their smoker. So it is doable. But again, those beekeepers are constantly checking on their hives. They know what stock they have. Their hives are healthy, because if your hives begin to become weak in an Africanized honeybee zone, they can be usurped. So usurp is just a Africanized honeybee colony coming in and landing on your hive and basically going in and taking over your hive. And so from 1 month to the next, you think your hives, they had some varroa pressure, or they were weaker, but next thing you know, they're mean too. And you're just all like, what happened? And that's another reason we asked, we prefer that you use marked queens. You can see what sort of queen, you can know that it's your queen and not, a usurped queen. But anyways, going back to desirable hives. So good honey producer, good queen layer, and or your queen's a good layer, good producer of bees, and that they have minimal tendency to swarm. And that's another thing about capturing feral swarms. You're basically getting the old queen. The old queen got kicked out, and for whatever reason, maybe the colony was too big and they swarmed off. Maybe something was wrong with her. They made a new queen, but they got rid of her. So you're getting last year's queen, and you don't know if she's going to be productive anymore. And she's going to have more of a tendency to want to swarm. So it is a benefit to know the stock that you're getting or introducing into your hive. All right, next slide. All right, undesirable hive. So talked a little bit about overdefensive. Nervous, runny, flying off. You're barely cracking that hive open, and they're flying into your face, greeting you. They're guarding a larger perimeter, or they're upset for days after you've inspected them. Those are not desirable traits. Those aren't traits that are more European traits. Those are traits more on the Africanized honeybee side. So we don't want that. It is undesirable. And they swarm more frequently, or perhaps abscond. They just completely leave. All right. So talking a little bit more about undesirable hives, other things, diseased hives, American foul brood, as well as, with unused equipment. If you have equipment that's just there, it can be like a motel sign saying, vacancy. you know. Come here, show up. And next thing you know, again, talking about usurpation, if your bees are weakened for some reason, you know, maybe a swarm was attracted to your unused equipment. Next thing you know, they take over your bee colony, and now you don't know the temperament of your hive because it's just been usurped. All right, next. All right, so I also look for approved colonies and hives. This just means that there's movable frames that you can pull out frames that you can take a look at the bees, see the health of the brood, look for the queen, make sure she's queen right. Also look, just fire breaks, make sure you're maintaining vegetation. You don't want to have fuel around just in case there's an accidental tip over of your smoker or some ash comes out of your exhaust and catches some brush on fire. Fire prevention. This is just having a smoker plug to plug up your smoker at the end of use. It's also having a secondary container for your smoker when it's not in use. Quick story about that. There was a beekeeper that I was talking to a while ago, and he had to learn the hard way about the secondary container. He was just going to travel like 5 miles, like 10-minute drive to a neighboring yard. He put his smoker in the bed of his pickup. It's like a plastic liner. He's driving down the freeway and he looks in his rearview mirror and he has like 4-foot-high flames in the bed of his pickup. So he has to pull over. He fortunately had a fire extinguisher, put out the fire. But had he had that secondary container, it would have contained it from tipping over and that sort of thing. So now he has that secondary container, and it also in your backyard, rather than just setting your smoker down on the ground, on the top cover, if it's windy, I mean, this can get knocked over. Having that secondary container, you can place it in there. It's a lot harder to tip over a bucket than it is this. So, again, fire prevention, we all know how important that is. We do have shovel, either a fire extinguisher, a garden hose, or a nozzle. Again, just firefighting supplies, pretty straightforward. I think we have a video here about hive checks. I don't know if we wanted. Yeah, well, I guess we'll just play it. So here's just a real quick video. So the University Cooperative Extension did some real nice videos. It's all on their website. I'm just going to cover the one on regular hive checks. We do ask that you do regular hive checks. You are a beekeeper, not a beehiver. I know you guys are all beekeepers in the room. I would encourage you to just advocate for more people to just do those regular hive checks rather than just intermittently. This is just going to talk about basic regular hive check. And Ben was actually the one that helped put together this video.
Beekeepers should perform regular hive inspections at least once a month. Hive inspections are done to continually monitor a colony's health, productivity, and temperament. Doing so will provide many insights into the queen's production, food stores, and apiary pest pressures, so the beekeeper will know if any measures or corrective actions are required. Hive inspections require looking at every aspect of the hive, and being thorough will pay off in the end. To begin, it's best to avoid approaching a hive from the entrance side. Begin by smoking the entrance, then cracking open the lid with a hive tool, and give a few more good puffs. Make mental notes, even while doing an initial smoking, of how your bees are reacting to your presence. It will be normal for a more than usual amount of bees to now be flying around, but they should not be acting overly aggressive, stinging your suit, hands, or equipment. Using a hive tool, pull out and inspect each frame with your back to the sun to get the best light. It is common, but not always necessary, to check the frame furthest from you first. Going down the line, pull out each frame, making observations, and keeping them in their original order. Repeat this process until you have checked all frames. Your objective during the inspection process is to 1. Locate and inspect the queen. Make sure she is healthy and active and not showing any signs of sickness. Make sure the workers are tending to her. 2. Check the combs for eggs, larvae, and pupa to see if the queen is producing healthy brood. Interlaying pattern is solid and uniform. 3. Check the combs for pollen stores and honey stores. 4. Check the comb for queen cells and remove them. 5. Check for excessive drone cells. 6. Check for surface pests such as varroa mite, beetles, and wax moths. 7. Check for signs and symptoms of diseases such as nosema, chalk brood, and foul brood.
All right, so hopefully it might have been hard to see what the bees' response was in opening up the hive and taking a look, pulling out frames. But now I'm going to show you just one of just some undesirable honeybee hive.
There you go. Here.
Looking up over the place.
Oh, right in front. That's real smart. You're all over the place.
Yeah, the worker.
All right, so what the video didn't show you was so it was an apiary inspection. The beekeeper had just opened up the top cover, the inner cover, and just started to pull out one frame. And that was it. And they just set off. I mean, he had a smoker, he had smoked them. The entrance was actually on the far side, and so they just went off. And unfortunately, that day he didn't have hiking boots or anything to cover his ankles. He just had like some Vans on and black socks of all things. And the bees found his ankles. And so he walked away with the everything open. And so, I picked up the smokers, tried to smoke them, and covered everything back up. But you could see how agitated the bees were. So, we always say over-defensive bees are around, but we just want to make sure that we're not raising them. And really, like with over-defensive bees, depending on the level of it and depending on your level of experience, if you do choose to replace a queen of an over-defensive hive, work with an experienced beekeeper to do so, not only for the safety of yourself, but the safety of others around you. And really ask yourself, is it worth it? Because sometimes it can be a 50-50 shot. Yeah, some beekeepers will do a divide. Maybe they'll try to combine them afterwards, but they may or may not try to rush that new queen if she was accepted or not. So, I'm all in favor of just cutting your losses. We really don't want that sort of genetic material in the environment anyways. We don't want those drones spreading out those sort of genetics. Africanized honeybees tend to produce more drones, and so they just like to, I guess they just like to mate, So, so we just want to make sure to cut out those lines if possible. So, all right, identification, name and phone number. We do ask height, 1 inch, black lettering. Why do you need that? If we need to contact you, it's a lot easier to contact you as soon as possible. Beekeepers place their bees on other people's properties all the time, so just the property owner might not necessarily be the beekeeper. First responders, if they're responding to a fire and need to go on to that site right away, or a pest control applicator is going to do a spray, and perhaps if that beekeeper wasn't registered, or maybe they were, they just hadn't registered that site, they know who to contact right away. So identification's really important. Next one. All right, this is just kind of a flow of figuring out what you would want to do in order to comply with the requirements. First, determine what jurisdiction you're in. Are you in the city or the county? If you're in the county, what tier level are you in? And then from there, what are your setback requirements? How far do you need to be from homes, property lines, roads, sensitive sites? Work on identifying your hives, where you're going to get your bees from, then register, turn in the paperwork, and you should be good to go. All right. All right, so what do? I help detect apiary pests and disease in hives. I work with managing the apiary registrations and pesticide notifications. I work with beekeepers promoting these best management practices. And also I help share information on educational opportunities, regulatory updates, and that sort of thing. All right. So what goes on in an apiary inspection? I'm basically inspecting for two of our pests that are really not wanted. American foul brood and overdefensive bees. You know, I do always offer and encourage mite checks. I have our little kit here where I'll do powdered sugar rolls with beekeepers so they can know the level of infestation of mites in their colonies. Just because you don't see them on your adult bees does not mean that you don't have them. Just an example of like a hive inspection sheet. Looking, you know, of course you want to make sure that your queen is right. Want to know what sort of pest pressures your hive's getting. You want to know the productivity of your queen. How's that laying pattern? You want to know the temperament of your bees, what signs to look for, and yeah. All right, just another example of, you know, what I'm looking for. On the left side, you know, if you're seeing real spotty brood pattern, there are other issues going on with your queen. You really want to take a look. It could be mite pressure. It could be some brood disease. More often than not, it's usually mite pressure compared to a healthy brood where it's nice, solid, uniform, semicircle shape, lots of bees. All right, so I also will sample for pests, and we also will do identification. Just some examples of diseases. There's some diagnostic kits that I always carry with me for American foul brood, for European foul brood. American foul brood is actually pretty easy to test for if you have a toothpick or a stick on the ground, you know, and you're seeing some sucking in cappings. You just poke that, and if it's coming out snotty, it's an indication of American foul brood. We do have it.
Do you see a lot of that?
I don't see a lot of it, but I do find it from time to time. And in talking to some beekeepers, they say they've come across it too. So some cappings can be sunken in. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but like right in here, sometimes there's perforations, little pin pricks. But again, it's sunken in, and what's happening is the bacteria is deteriorating that larva, and so basically it's just sucking everything in, and it's starting to pull that capping rather than being like a nice rounded off. It's sinking in. Yeah. So when you have a lot of larvae that are decomposing within the hive, then that's where you might smell that foul brood smell. This past year, when I did come across some of it. To me, it smelled kind of like sulfur, but some others will say it smells kind of like rotted meat. So, but I mean, it wasn't like, you know, I didn't go into the yard and like, you know, like it was just foul, you know. It wasn't until we opened up the hive and took apart the first and second story box where we started smelling it. So.
Do they keep track of it, like on a map anywhere that we can download? Or?
We don't, but that's why I'm glad you brought that up. So do we keep track of it on any internet access or anything like that? We don't, but I do notify beekeepers within a 1 to 2 mile radius to say, hey, listen, I found this. I can go out there and meet with you, or just be on the lookout for it because we did detect it. Because what ends up happening, and this is why it's so contagious, is those bees, that colony is going to collapse. Like the newer brood's not going to ever hatch out. The older bees may drift off to another hive with that honey. They're transporting that bacteria, or if not, sometimes neighboring colonies go in and they just rob that out. And then they pick up that bacteria and then they take it to another colony. And it just spreads and spreads that way. So that's why it's a highly contagious disease, and it's really important that you know what to look for, especially if you're seeing some problems in your bee colonies. Oh, and then, yeah, so we also look for mites here. It's not as good of a, it's kind of hard to see, but anyways, yeah. All right, so how can people report complaints to our office? You can call our office. We do have a complaint form on our website where you can call to if a citizen's having problems with bees or a beekeeper's bees, they can notify us either way. Sometimes we get beekeepers calling on other beekeepers that may not be registered. All right, so reasons for complaints: stinging, over-defensive, location, swarming in water. We kind of talked about those. Just keep it going.
I have a question about
Yes.
stinging.
Yes.
How would they know that it's your bee stinging something? There are bees everywhere.
Yeah, but it's not characteristic of a foraging bee to be more interested in the person than a flower, right?
Yeah. But
And so,
I mean, if someone spots them.
yeah, most of the incidences that we've come across, it's always correlated with beekeeper check their bees, perhaps they replaced the queen, and that later on that day or perhaps the next day, there was multiple bees following somebody. Now that's uncharacteristic of a foraging bee. Like usually they're all just individually, but if you have a group, it's because they're protecting something. And perhaps it could be a feral hive, but we scout all that out and we do interviews to try to figure out what the source of those bees are. But it's really uncharacteristic of a foraging bee. Like, you know, most of the stinging incidents, it just didn't involve one bee. It involved multiple bees kind of hovering and protecting something, and in lining up the other activities at the beekeeper. You know, some of the complainants were saying that they smelled smoke or they saw a beekeeper working on their bees earlier that day or just the day before. And so there's a correlation between the two. So how to mitigate complaints? Conduct regular hive checks. Check on your bees. How are they doing? Is their temperament still good? Do I still have my marked queen? Have they gotten usurped? Using marked queens, you know, sometimes it's, you know, yes, the marking can come off at times, but starting with the marked queen, it's always going to help you to find her and to know that she's still the queen that you had introduced. Source your bees from reputable bee suppliers. Requeen with gentle stock. All right. So what do you do if your bees are bothering a neighbor? You know, if it's really a hazard, I mean, you just abate them. Really, I mean, that's plain and simple. Otherwise, if you're in a residential area, I highly recommend, if they're over-defensive, don't try to requeen them there. That's going to stir them up, especially if they're already over-defensive. Try to find a place where you could relocate them that has a little bit greater distance from neighboring homes, confined animals, so you can do it. Because it does stir them up, especially an over-defensive hive. I mean, you saw that one video of how the bees reacted just from pulling out one frame. Work with an experienced beekeeper. There are certain techniques for over-defensive hives that can be more successful than others. I did work with one beekeeper, tried 3 times unsuccessfully to requeen an over-defensive hive. So at $30 a pop, I mean $90 in the hole, all for, well, $30 for the queens plus another $50, $60 of shipping. So, but actually I think he picked them up from yeah. So anyways, sometimes, as Tracy was saying, your bees can be hangry. They might need water. Might need food. So, all right. So we do have an enforcement piece to our requirements. We do just do compliance monitoring, but at times, if we're not getting that cooperation, I mean, almost 100% of beekeepers, it's just always been compliance monitoring. We've never really had to use any other modes of enforcement. We don't want to either, but we do have them in place just if needed. So there's administrative warnings, administrative citations, and abatements. Like I was telling you, finally that beekeeper who tried to requeen his hive that didn't want to be accepted, he just ended up abating the hive. So he just, you know, somebody was asking, like, I think Simon, you're asking, well, what procedures? It's kind of up to the beekeeper on how they're going to take down their hive. This beekeeper just chose to seal them up just with saran wrap so they couldn't get in or out. So other ones with American foul brood, they bag them up so that way they can escape and the hive can be robbed out and avoid spreading any American foul brood disease. This is just a guide from the Geological USGS services. habitat where Africanized honeybees can be conducive to. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there are some blue marks in here where Africanized honeybees actually are. It's basically the Southwest and Florida. So impacts to honeybees, well, to having overdefensive or undesirable bees, it'll be difficult to keep that gentle strain of honeybees if we just let them get out of control. They can also, that portrayal of bees and beekeepers can change. Right now, there's a lot of momentum positively to support and help honeybees. Having incidences where bees become nuisances can really change that light on bees. All right, so I also will work with our pesticide regulatory program if there are, so from time to time we do get calls of a suspicion of bees being poisoned through exposure to pesticides. So I will go out on those calls. I will do a hive health check to try to see if there's any other possibilities. A lot of times, the first thing I always ask is, have you been checking your mite loads? Viruses that are caused by mites have give a lot of symptoms of that look a lot like pesticide poisoning. So it's important. I kind of do a diagnostic with them when I go out there to check on the bees. But
here you have a ton of bees in front, all dead on the ground.
Yes, yeah. Well, possibly, but there could also be a big die-off for certain viral related to Varroa.
So do you test them? You take a bag and you test them, or how
At times, if we know what pesticide traces that we're looking for, then yes, we will sample and submit a sample to our California Department of Food and Agriculture. Yes. All right. So moving on, talking about like who to call regarding managed bees or feral bees. So this is a flow chart that we have on our website. It talks about who to call basically on this side of the flow chart, dealing with feral bees, wild bees in the environment, whether they're in the city or the county, who would you call? And then on this other side, we have managed bees, who to call. Most of the city departments have some sort of code enforcement or animal control. And if they're in the unincorporated parts of the county, then it'd be our department. All right, so let's have some questions for you, a little review. Who does apiary registration apply to? Everybody, yes. You can click one. Oh, sorry. All right. Yeah. Oh. All right. Yes, thank you. Where can you find the registration form?
SD County Bees.
Perfect. And then, let's see, who does a county bee ordinance apply to? The county bee ordinance. Yes. Beekeepers in the unincorporated parts of the county. Perfect. And then, how do you know if you're in the unincorporated parts of the county? You can use the jurisdiction finder. Perfect. Yes. All right, moving on. You guys are good. All right, talking about water sources. Is this a good water source? You think your bees will like to take a swim in that and drink that up? No. Now, this is kind of scary, but this is a little mouse that drowned in there. Maybe that was their landing site. I don't know. All right, so these are good water sources, right? A lot of surface area. They actually have a tube here with a pump, and then they got some plants in there. Yeah, so just different examples. All right, so are there any issues here with placing these right here, right up against the fence? You think that's a good location for them? You think the neighbor will like that or be? Yeah. So yeah, you want to remember, kind of have, be a good neighbor as well. Think about your neighbor too, right? So be off the property lines, off the roads, off the neighboring dwellings. If you're within 300 feet, have that flyover barrier. That's just responsible, looking out for yourself, not only to comply, but also liability. I mean, when it comes at the end of the day, if a neighbor gets stung, they can take you to court, and then it'll, if you're not a registered beekeeper and you're going to court and they're asked, you're going to be asked those questions. What were you doing to avoid being negligent? What are you going to tell them? If you're registered, if you're following best management practices, you're going to look a lot lot more responsible than that unregistered beekeeper that just placed them at one spot. So, all right. So issues. What do you think the issues are here? Yes. No movable frames, can't be inspected. You don't know if, it's important to know the health of your brood. All right. We will move on. All right, so just in summary, I wanted to share a little bit about what the San Diego County Beekeeping Ordinance is. Basically, it's just, it allows for more beekeeping opportunities, right? It was pretty restricted with the previous distance requirements. Now it's trying to help all sizes and shapes of beekeepers and locations to raise honeybees on different size properties. So, but at the same time, because we are in an Africanized honeybee zone, we do ask that these mitigating measures be implemented to hopefully avoid any situations with neighbors. And as Tracy was saying, I try to intercede and help make it work for everybody, whether it's a Optin sensitive site or a situation where the bees perhaps have become over defensive. I do, especially even if it's a beginning beekeeper, I do try to put you in contact with the experienced beekeeper to help you along the way. Mark's helped out with that a couple times, and they've been really good about supporting that. So we do want to try to keep it as a community of honey of beekeepers to make this work. And for each city, it's going to be up to you what the priorities are, and for your citizens, and then ultimately the effectiveness of whether it's our program or another zoning ordinance is just going to be the willingness and cooperation of beekeepers. So
Very good. Thank you.
yeah, so thank you guys.